Chapter 20. Into the Manor. Even as they treaded north toward the Blaggest estate for a brief game of Zipsy, Janner knew they would be visiting Ankle Jelly Manor that afternoon. He had argued with his stubborn brother in heated whispers during their chores that morning, but it soon became clear that for Tink, fear and common sense were no match for his curiosity. They were no match for Janner's either. He had been unable to stop thinking about that mysterious warning on the map, right next to the alluring X. Besides, he told himself, Tink was going with or without him. Who else would protect his little brother? So in the early afternoon, the Blackest boys won the game as usual, and Janner and Tink bade them farewell. When they were sure they weren't being watched, they struck out running through the high weeds of the old lane, around a bend, and up a hill until they were well out of sight of the estate. The lane north of the Blackest estate was overgrown. Few had traveled it since the homesteads beyond the Blackest family's estate had been burned and abandoned in the war. It wasn't long before Janner doubled over with his hands on his knees, gasping for air. Tink had outrun him and was waiting several yards ahead, looking at the countryside, trying not to look winded himself. The oaks that shaded the road had grown scarce, and the grassy land sloped upward, away from the town and the cliffs, and toward the dark edge of Clipwood Forest. Jenner stood up with great effort and wiped his forehead with the front of his shirt. Tink pointed down the slopes at the roof of the Blaggest home, peeking from the trees below them. Beyond was the Clipwood Township, a tiny strand of buildings in the distance. The only inn could be made out easily since it stood a story higher than the other buildings, but eastward the land dropped away into the gray expanse, the dark sea of darkness. Somewhere, each brother thought to himself, at the edge of the sea, beneath the shade of those clipwood trees, sat the Igby cottage. For an hour, Jenner and Tink followed the ancient lane as best they could. Each time the road began to blend into tall stretches of heather and disappear, they would search anew for the faint depression of the path in the swaying grass. The line of the forest loomed ever closer, and soon Jenner was pointing to the shape of what must be the ruined structure of Ankle Jelly Manor. Tink picked up his pace, and soon they stood before the manor, its craggy back to the forest. The two gaping second-floor windows were made Janner think of the eye sockets of a skull watching their approach. He stopped in front of a rusty iron gate that hung sad and crooked on ancient hinges. Neither brother spoke, unwilling to admit they were afraid and wondering what foolishness had made coming here seem sensible. It was clear that the manor had once been a beautiful place. Several tall and mildewed statues of people in various poses dotted the courtyard. One was of a fat man eating a lamb chop, the sight of which caused Tink's stomach to growl loudly, the sound of which made Jenner jump an inch off the ground. Another statue near the house depicted a laughing woman swinging a terrified cat by its hind leg. Another statue, covered in vines, was of a weeping man scratching his large belly with a rake. Dangling from the rake handle was a cluster of stone grapes. The roof of the mansion had long ago collapsed, and everywhere weeds and vines had begun the slow work of pulling the stones and aged timbers back to the earth. Jenner turned and looked back down the long slope at the distant town. "We came this far, didn't we?" he said uncertainly. He took a deep breath and passed through the gate. The air was quiet as a grave. No bird sang. No wind blew. Janner shuddered at the thought of the many beasts that roamed the forest. He wondered how often those beasts ventured beyond the trees and into places like Ankle Jelly Manor. Or were the animals afraid of ghosts too? Tink followed his older brother past an old stone bench in what appeared to have been a flower garden lined with stones, now overgrown in the tangle of budding weeds. The front of the bench bore an inscription. Jenner pulled the vines away and read, "Brimney Stoop enjoys his soup." Tink's stomach roared. "Did we bring anything to eat?" he asked, knowing they hadn't. Jenner ignored him. "Let's have another look at the map," he said. They sat on the bench, and Jenner examined the map, trying hard to ignore the dire warning about entering the place they were about to enter. The edge of the forest behind the house was a tangled green wall, silent and grim. and as Tink stared into it, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was staring back. Is there anything on here that tells us exactly where to go? Janner said. It says, in the catacombs below is hidden in the hollow. I guess that means we need to find a way down. He pointed to the foundation of the manor. Under there. Tink looked long at the skull-like stare at the manor and shivered. Why are we here again? Because you talked me into it, that's why. You know, a snack would be good about now, Tink said. Maybe we should head back and... Nope, Janner said firmly. We came this far. You're not backing out. It's just a suggestion, Tink said, forcing a chuckle. The sound of his laugh was unnatural there in the ruins. Janner told himself there were no ghosts in the manor, and the warnings on the map were only there in case it fell into the wrong hands. Never mind that it had, he argued with himself. But if that were really the case, Oscar hadn't bargained on two young boys finding it. He must have forgotten that in the mind of a boy, a warning isn't much different from an invitation. Come on, Janner said with resolve, and Tink followed. They crunched through the thick brambles that surrounded the stone manor, looking for any sign of a cellar entrance. Janner smelled the musty scent of old things, and inside every window they passed he saw tumbled stones and fallen rafters in the dim light. From the rear of the manor, he and Tink peered through a back door that led to what must have been the kitchen. Vines covered a long, cracked counter with stone-cut wash basins. The ceiling of the first floor had caved in above the kitchen, allowing shafts of sunlight to cross a tangle of old wood, pots, and fallen stones on the floor. They moved on through the brush, around the mansion, and past a dry fountain that housed a prickly rosebush on the rear lawn. Beyond the fountain, the forest glared at them. Janner's skin crawled. Let's go back around to the front, he whispered. Tink nodded gravely and followed his brother back around the house. Neither brother would admit it, but they each felt better with something between them and the trees. That is, until they rounded the corner. The two brothers stood at the main entrance to the house, peering into shadows. The air was still and heavy with the afternoon heat. A lantern would be nice, Janner said, eyeing the dark entrance. Then they each took a deep breath and walked side by side over the threshold into the ruins of Ankle Jelly Manor.